So, if I'm being honest, I'm a little bit surprised about the large number of people that we've got registered on this webinar because, as we know ourselves, everybody hates timesheets. Your team sees them as being a bit of a pointless admin, something that they have to do perhaps at the end of the week, usually in a rush, usually guessing, just to get it off their plate. And if you're leading the business, then you're pretty much stuck in the middle because you know they matter. So they're not just admin, they're the difference between understanding your profitability and pretty much guessing it, between planning resources properly and constantly firefighting, between knowing what work actually costs and hoping that it works out. But despite all that, getting accurate, timely data can feel a bit like pulling teeth. So the question isn't about how do we make people fill in timesheets, it's how do we make time tracking simple enough and valuable enough that people actually want to do it. So that's what we're going to dig into today. So we're going to look at why people really resist timesheets, and it's probably not for the reasons you think. We'll talk about how a simple daily habit can completely replace that Friday panic. We'll explore how to make time tracking useful for everybody in the business, not just your management team. And importantly, what to actually do with the data once you've got it, so it drives better decisions, not just reports. And ultimately, how to build a culture where accurate time tracking just becomes the norm.
So here's the scene. It's Friday afternoon. The reminder email's gone out again. But you know what's coming. Monday morning, half the team scrambling to remember what they did last week, filling in timesheets from memory and making their best guess at what went where. And I have actually seen this from both sides. So I've been the person chasing the timesheets and I've been the person avoiding them. So when we say timesheets without tears, we don't just mean your tears, we mean your team's tears too. Because if people hate filling them in, the data you get is rubbish anyway. So let's start with the why.
Cool. So why do people resist? There are many reasons, and every agency we work with pretty much tells us the same story. As I mentioned before, they know that time data matters, but getting it reliably, well, that's really the hard part. And when we dig into why, it's never usually about laziness. There are typically four things that are going on. The first thing is people just don't see the point. So if you're a designer or an account manager and nobody ever tells you what happens to the numbers you put in, why would you care? So it feels like admin for admin's sake. Next is fear. There is definitely true this. People do worry that your timesheets are being used to check up on them. So if you've logged, say, 5 hours on something that should have taken three, there's a danger somebody's going to have a word with you. So they tend to fudge it or they wait until Friday and guess. Third, we've got a whole kind of cultural mismatch. So Matt, this will resonate with you. Creative people feel that tracking time in neat blocks does not reflect the way that they actually work. So they might be thinking about a problem in the shower, they're sketching on a train. Work doesn't happen in tidy half-hour slots. And without time parameters, creators will naturally spend long on pieces of work, crafting, honing, perfecting, which is brilliant for quality, but it means that you're giving away time for free, and that sets expectations for next time. And then finally, the process is painful. So if your system is clunky, people won't do it. That's not their fault. That's a system problem. So that's four things that are maybe working against you. And if you try and solve it by just sending more reminder emails, then you're treating the symptom, not the cause.
So, what happens when you don't address those four things? You get stuck in what we like to call the Friday panic cycle. So, the reminder goes out, half the team fills it in from memory, guessing what they did on Tuesday, and the other half ignores it completely. Monday morning, ops are chasing, but by the time the data's in, it's approximate at best, and decisions are being made on those numbers. Research actually shows that time recall, the accuracy drops significantly after just 24 hours. So by Friday, people aren't logging what happened, they're reconstructing what they think happened. Your profitability reports, your resource plans, your project margins are all built on guesswork. And that's not just a compliance problem, it's a data quality problem. So, bad data leads to bad decisions. So, how do we fix it? We go back to those four reasons that Steve just mentioned and address them one by one.
Okay, so Reason number one, no perceived value. This is the bit that most agencies get wrong. Time tracking is treated as something management needs. Maybe finance need for billing, ops need it for resourcing, but nobody asks what's in it for the person who's actually filling out the timesheet. And if the answer to that question is nothing, then don't be surprised if they don't do it. So, what can we actually give back? Well, let's start with visibility. So, when people can see how their time breaks down, they understand their own working patterns. So, maybe how much of their working week is spent doing client work versus internal meetings. Am I spending too much time doing admin? So, that's useful information for anyone. Then there's the workload. If your system shows people their capacity and what's coming up, the timesheet becomes a planning tool, not just a reporting tool. People can see when they're overloaded and the managers can see too. So better conversations about resourcing instead of waiting until somebody burns out. And then there's recognition. If your team can see a project came in underestimate, that's definitely something to celebrate. If it went over, that's a conversation about whether the estimate was wrong or maybe the brief changed midway through the project. But either way, it's information, not blame. And one of the agencies that we work with actually started sharing a very simple weekly dashboard, and it was time logged versus time estimated by project. No individual names, but within a month, their completion rate went through the roof because people could finally see why the time data mattered.
And And the reason number two is fear. So if someone's working overtime and not logging it, you literally cannot see it. You can't help someone whose workload you don't know about. So framing timesheets as a protection mechanism is not a surveillance tool, it's a really powerful shift. So you're saying we can only look after you if you tell us what's going on. The language matters enormously. So if timesheets are positioned as a policing tool, people resist. If they're positioned as a way to understand work better, protect people from overload, and make smarter decisions, that's a completely different conversation. But it has to be backed up with action because people will test it. So if the first person who logs an honest overrun gets hauled into a meeting, everyone else goes back to fudging the numbers. And when someone logs something uncomfortable, say a project that went over, a week that was heavier than it should have been, treat it as information, not as performance issue. And that's how you build trust. And trust is what makes the data honest. The other thing that helps is framing time tracking as something that protects creative time. So when you can see your designers are spending 30% of their week in meetings, that's ammunition to get them out of those meetings. When you can prove a project needs more creative hours than the budget allows, that's how you can push back on scope or renegotiate the fee. So the data should work for creatives, it shouldn't work against them. And the third reason that Steve mentioned was cultural mismatch. So the way many agencies track time doesn't actually reflect on how agency work actually happens. So you rarely sit down at 9 a.m., do exactly one thing for 90 minutes, and then switch cleanly to the next job. Whether you're a creative, an account manager, or a project lead, you're often juggling multiple things at once. So if your time tracking forces people into those rigid half-hour blocks with hyper-specific task codes, you're asking them then to translate their day into a format that feels false. And when something feels false, then that's when people tend to disengage. So the fix is to make your tracking categories match how work actually flows. So log against phase or deliverables, not microtasks. Don't create 47 million charge codes when 8 will do. And acknowledge that thinking time is real time. So 2 hours developing a creative concept is 2 hours of skilled work, and it shouldn't need justifying.
And reason number four, the process feels painful. And this is where we get kind of really practical. So the biggest shift isn't just when people log time, it's how easy you make it for them to do it. So the reality is there is no single way that works for everybody. So you might have a client service lead, a designer, a developer, and they all work differently. So asking them to log time in the same way is usually where the friction starts. So the goal isn't just log time as you go. The goal is make it effortless to capture time in the flow of how people already work. That's why in Synergist, we give you multiple ways to do that. So some people prefer the timer, start, stop, done. Others work better using their calendar or pre-populated bookings, just convert it into a timesheet. Some prefer more of a weekly or a daily view to quickly log what's been done. Others might log time directly from tasks or the Kanban board. And for those on the move, there's also the mobile app. So instead of forcing one behavior, you remove the barrier altogether. People can then choose a method that fits their role and their day. So, for example, a creative might simply open their calendar, see what's already been scheduled, and convert it into a timesheet in seconds. Client service person might log time as they move between meetings and tasks, and your project managers might update time directly against tasks as they complete them. But the key is people aren't starting from a blank page. The work is already there, booked, scheduled, assigned. They're just confirming or adjusting it. And that's what changes everything. Because now time recording isn't a separate task, it's just a natural extension of the work they're already doing. So rather than relying on one approach like a timer, it's about giving people options and reducing the effort to almost zero, because when it's easy, you might find that people actually do it.
Well, that's the hope anyway, isn't it?
That's the hope, can't guarantee.
So that's all four reasons addressed. We've given people a reason to care, we've removed the fear, and we've respected how people actually work. And we've made the process so easy, there's really nothing left to resist. So now you've got some good data coming in. What do you do with it? And this is where it gets exciting. So the worst thing you can do is collect all that lovely data and then not use it. That's the fastest way to kill the habit that you just managed to build. So the first thing, and arguably the most important, so compare actual versus estimated on every project, every time. So if you quoted 40 hours and it took 60, you need to know that, not when the project's over, but while it's still running, so you can actually do something about it. And your estimate and your quote are not the same thing. So your estimate is your internal assessment of how long something will take. And your quote is the commercial price you give to your client. Time data makes your estimates more accurate. So better estimates lead to better commercial decisions. So many agencies have been quoting on gut feel for years. But when they start comparing actual to estimated, they realize certain types of work always run, or certain clients always have more rounds of amends. Knowing this allows you to change how you price. But we've also got so the real cost of delivery. So time data tells you what work costs you to produce, not what you've charged, what it cost you. So combine that with salary data, and you can get the true project profitability. And this can be quite shocking when you do this for you the first time you do it properly. And next, we've got resource planning. So, if you know how long things actually take, you can plan realistically. You can stop overpromising. You can spot bottlenecks before they become crises. And then we've got that non-chargeable time. So, things like internal meetings, admin, pictures, training. If your creatives are spending half their week in internal meetings, that's a problem you can fix, but only if you can see it. And then we've got client transparency. So when a client queries an invoice, can you show them exactly where their budget went? If you can, that builds trusts, even when a conversation is difficult. And then we've got patterns. So are certain teams consistently over capacity? Are particular project types always unprofitable? Is your new business work eating into your delivery time? These are all strategic questions, and the answers all lie in that timesheet data. We work on this with lots of agencies, but I worked on with one particularly in exactly like that, in exactly this, and they went from sort of disconnected time tracking to having everything connected and visible. And they saw a significant increase in profitability, something like 25%. So and that's not just because people worked harder, it's because the business could finally see what was happening and then they could act on it.
So you've addressed the resistance, you've fixed the process, you're using the data. The last piece is culture. and it starts at the top. So if your leadership team doesn't log their time, guess what? Nobody else will either. So beyond that, we need to start sharing the insights, not just the individual timesheets. We need to show people dashboards, talk about project profitability in team meetings, make time data part of how you run the business, not just a separate admin task. But also celebrate the habit, not the perfection. So that's acknowledging the people who log every day. Don't just chase the ones who aren't. Recognize the ones who are. Also, ask your team what's working. If the daily routine isn't landing, then find out why. Stay curious and keep adjusting. So this isn't a project with an end date, it's just a practice. Okay, so covered quite a bit there in the session. Brings us to the end. As usual, we like to leave you with our three key takeaways. For me, the first one would be timesheet resistance isn't a people problem. It's definitely a process problem. So if your people are avoiding timesheets, it's rarely because they're lazy or difficult. It's usually because the process is clunky, time consuming, or feels a little bit pointless. So if login time takes too long, maybe interrupts their flow or doesn't clearly benefit them, they'll resist it, consciously or not. So instead of trying to enforce compliance, take a step back and ask, is it easy to do? Does it fit in with how people actually work? Does it feel worth it? So fix the experience, and then hopefully the behavior follows naturally.
And secondly, we've got log as you go, not from memory. So the biggest shift you can make is moving from recall from recall, sorry, to real time. So Friday afternoon timesheets aren't accurate, and Monday timesheets are even less so. And that's not because people don't care, as Steve mentioned, but it's because no one can accurately reconstruct a full week of fragmented work. So the alternative is simple. Shift from weekly or even monthly in some cases I've seen to daily. So giving options on what best works for the individual to fill out their timesheets. So that could be from the calendar or a task or even that timer system. And this removes friction, improves accuracy, and actually reduces effort. So no more guesswork, no more stress, no more chasing people at the end of the week. So if you change one thing from today, make sure you change this.
Yeah, I agree. And finally, showing people the value or they won't see the point. Because if your timesheets disappear into that black hole, people will treat them like admin. But when you use the data visibly, that's when things change. So showing your team how it impacts profitability, using it to plan resourcing properly, highlighting where time is being lost or underpriced, but feeding it back into making better decisions. But most importantly, give something back. Help individuals in your team see how their data improves their work, not just the management reporting. That's how you move from compliance to a culture where accurate time tracking is just how things are done. And if you get these three things right, so the process, the behavior, and the value, timesheets stop being a battle and hopefully start becoming one of the most powerful tools in your business.